My name is Sophie Clarke, and I was 35 years old when everything I built collapsed in a single afternoon. 20 years. That's how long I gave to Meridian Systems. 2 decades of arriving before the sun came up, of staying until the cleaning crew made their rounds, of believing that loyalty mattered, that consistency mattered, that showing up day after day, building something brick by brick would mean something in the end. I started as a junior analyst in 2003, back when the office still had cubicles with fabric walls and desktop computers that hummed like refrigerators. I learned the systems from the ground up. I took on projects no one else wanted. I stayed late to fix other people's mistakes without keeping score. By year 5, I was leading a team. By year 10, I was the person new hires were told to shadow if they wanted to understand how things really worked. I wasn't the loudest voice in meetings. I didn't play golf with executives or network at happy hours. I just did the work, consistently, quietly. Well, my performance reviews were always the same: exceeds expectations, reliable, trusted. I mentored junior analysts who went on to become directors. I built documentation systems that became company standard. I was the institutional memory people turned to when no one else knew the answer. The culture felt like family. We celebrated birthdays with grocery store cake in the break room. We knew each other's kids' names. When my father died in 2018, my manager sent flowers and told me to take all the time I needed. I believed them. Then, in late 2022, the acquisition happened. New parent company, new executive team, new priorities we were assured would enhance what we'd built. In the first all-hands meeting, the new VP said something I didn't think much of at the time. "We're going to bring fresh energy to this organization." I remember nodding. I didn't realize fresh meant disposable. It started so small I convinced myself I was paranoid. First, I wasn't included in a planning meeting for a project I'd originated. My manager said it was an oversight, that they'd loop me in later. They didn't. Then I noticed my team's weekly report was being presented by someone else, a director brought in during the acquisition, who'd been with the company less than 6 months. When I asked about it, I was told they were streamlining communication channels. My responsibilities began disappearing, like water through cupped hands. The client account I'd managed for 8 years was reassigned to a younger analyst with an MBA from a school I'd never heard of. The training program I'd developed was handed to someone who'd never trained anyone. No explanations, just calendar updates and revised org charts. Meetings happened without me. I'd discover them afterward, seeing the conference room empty, noticing the whiteboard still had notes in handwriting I recognized. I wasn't fired, I wasn't demoted, I was simply erased, present but irrelevant. I started questioning everything. Had I done something wrong, missed a deadline, offended someone without realizing it? I replayed conversations in my mind at night, searching for the moment I'd failed. I found nothing, which somehow made it worse. So I worked harder. I arrived earlier, stayed later, volunteered for projects no one wanted. I thought if I could just prove my value clearly enough, things would correct themselves. The confusion would resolve. I'd been here 20 years. Surely that counted for something. My husband noticed the tension. She said, "You're different," one night. "You're not sleeping." I told her it was just a busy period. I didn't know how to explain that I was being slowly erased from a place I'd helped build, and no one was saying it out loud. 3 months in, I overheard 2 of the new executives in the hallway. "We need to phase out the old guard," one said. "Make room for people who understand where we're going." I stood there with my coffee, invisible, finally understanding. This wasn't confusion, it was strategy. The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. on a Friday. My manager and someone from HR I'd never met. That's when I knew. They didn't waste time. "Sophie, we're restructuring the department to align with our new strategic direction. Your position is being eliminated effective today." The HR representative slid a manila folder across the table. "This outlines your severance package and transition details." 20 years reduced to 4 sentences. I heard myself ask why. The response was a rehearsed symphony of corporate nothing, organizational efficiency, evolving needs, mutual benefit, fresh perspective, words designed to sound like reasons without actually being reasons. My manager wouldn't meet my eyes. The HR rep had clearly done this before. Sympathetic expression, practiced pauses, a box of tissues positioned within reach. "You'll need to gather your personal belongings today," she said. "Security will escort you out." That's when it became real. The physical sensation was strange. A hollowness in my chest, a ringing in my ears, my hands suddenly cold. I signed papers I didn't read. I nodded at words I didn't process. I walked back to my desk with a cardboard box and a security guard who pretended to be checking his phone. 20 years fit into one box. A coffee mug my daughter made in 3rd grade, a desk plant that had survived a decade, 3 framed certifications. People I'd worked with for years suddenly found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. A few nodded, no one spoke. The drive home took 30 minutes. I spent it rehearsing sentences. They eliminated my position. It's not about performance. The severance is decent. Each version sounded weaker than the last. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before going inside, the severance packet open on my lap. That's when I saw it, a clause that contradicted the employee handbook I'd helped revise 5 years ago. Termination without cause required 60 days' notice or payment in lieu. They were offering 30. I read it 3 times to be sure. Then I read the section about waiving my right to legal action, the signature line waiting at the bottom. The deadline, 7 days. Something shifted. Not anger yet, just clarity. They'd made a mistake, a small one, but in their hurry to erase me, they'd gotten sloppy. I told my husband that night. She listened, then asked about the severance amount. When I told her, she nodded. "That's something, at least. You'll find another job. You always land on your feet." I waited for the anger on my behalf. It didn't come. "I'm thinking about not signing," I said. "There are some irregularities in the—" "Sophie," her voice was careful, the tone she used when trying to talk me down from something. "Just take it. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." My parents were worse. "That's just how corporations work now," my father said over the phone. "No loyalty anymore. Sign the papers, move on. You're too old to be unemployed for long." Too old. He didn't mean it as an insult, but it landed like one anyway. My sister called it emotional. "You're hurt, I get it, but suing them? That's career suicide. Who's going to hire someone with a lawsuit on their record? Think about your family." I was thinking about my family, about 20 years of missed dinners and weekend emails and delayed vacations because the company needed me, about the promise that loyalty would matter, that tenure would protect you, that doing good work would mean something. Everyone had the same advice: let it go, move forward, don't burn bridges, as if the bridge hadn't already been burned from the other side. My husband worried about health insurance, about the mortgage, about what we'd tell the neighbors. She didn't say it directly, but I could feel her shame radiating like heat. The shame of having an unemployed husband, of our household losing status, of failure by association. I stopped bringing it up, started lying awake instead, staring at the ceiling, replaying the same conversations. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being emotional. Maybe this was just how things worked, and I was too naive to accept it. But something wouldn't let me sign. Not anger. I barely felt angry. It was something clearer than that. A recognition that silence protected the system, that taking the money and disappearing meant the next person would face the same thing, with no warning, no precedent, no consequence for the people who decided 20 years of someone's life was disposable. 3 nights later, I sat alone at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., laptop open, searching employment attorney near me. I didn't tell anyone. I just started typing. The attorney's office was smaller than I expected. No mahogany desk, no wall of leather-bound books, just a functional space with filing cabinets and a woman named Sarah Chen, who'd been practicing employment law for 15 years. She didn't offer sympathy. She asked for documents. I'd brought everything: the severance agreement, my employee handbook, performance reviews going back a decade, the termination letter, emails. She read in silence, occasionally making notes, her expression unchanged. "Did they document any performance issues before this?" she asked. "No, my last review was 8 months ago. Exceeds expectations." "And the people retained in similar roles, how old are they?" "I hadn't thought about it that way. Younger. Most are under 35. She nodded, still reading. "This severance clause contradicts their own policy. They're offering half what their handbook requires for termination without cause." She looked up. "And they're conditioning it on you waiving all legal rights, including age discrimination claims." The room felt very quiet. "Do I have a case?" "Yes." No hesitation. "Possible age discrimination, breach of contract, policy violations. It's not about feelings, it's about evidence, and you haven't." She explained the process with the same clinical precision: filing the complaint, discovery, where both sides produce documents, depositions, the possibility of settlement. This takes months, sometimes years. It's uncomfortable, expensive, though I work on contingency. Your family will pressure you to drop it. Your former colleagues will distance themselves. The company will make you look like a disgruntled employee. "And if I sign their agreement?" "You take the money, you disappear, and they do this to the next person with no consequences." I sat with that for a long moment. This wasn't revenge. I didn't want to destroy anyone. I just wanted to not disappear, to matter enough that erasing me had a cost. "How do we start?" She slid a retainer agreement across the desk. I signed it with a pen that had the firm's name printed on the side, my handwriting steadier than I expected. I'd crossed a line. My family would call it crazy, vindictive, self-destructive, but I'd already been destroyed. This was just refusing to do it quietly. The lawsuit was filed on a Tuesday. I didn't post about it, didn't tell extended family, didn't send a manifesto to former coworkers. I just let Sarah submit the paperwork and went about my day. The shift happened internally. I stopped being the person this happened to and became the person making it happen. Small distinction, enormous difference. Discovery began 3 weeks later. The company had to produce documents, emails, personnel files, termination records for the past 5 years, communications about restructuring decisions. Sarah explained they were required to hand over anything relevant, and relevance was broadly defined. I imagined lawyers in conference rooms sorting through years of careless emails, executives suddenly remembering conversations they'd had in hallways, someone in HR realizing they'd created a pattern. The company's first response came through their attorney, carefully worded, professionally offended, denying all allegations. But underneath the language, I could feel something: concern. I wasn't a person anymore. I was a problem that required management. My husband found out when a relative asked her about it at a family gathering. She came home furious. "You didn't think to tell me you actually went through with this? This is humiliating, Sophie. People are talking." My brother called it vindictive. My sister said I was being selfish, thinking only about myself instead of how this affected everyone. "Just drop it before you make it worse." But I wasn't angry. That's what they couldn't understand. I was calm. This wasn't revenge. It was refusal. Refusal to pretend 20 years didn't matter. Refusal to let them rewrite my value as disposable. I kept job searching. Went to interviews, updated my resume, had awkward conversations where potential employers asked about the gap in employment, and I gave careful, honest answers. Some interviews ended quickly after that. Others didn't. The loneliness was constant. I'd sit at my laptop applying for positions while legal documents arrived by email, 2 parallel tracks of my life running in opposite directions. My husband stopped asking about either. Then, unexpectedly, support appeared. A former coworker reached out privately. "I heard. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, what they did was wrong." Just that. But it mattered. I found an online forum of people who'd been through similar situations, not a rage community, just people who understood what it felt like to be erased and choose not to accept it. Their stories steadied me. Sarah remained constant, professional, unshaken, treating this like the work it was. 4 months in, she called. They want to talk settlement. I felt nothing dramatic, just a quiet recognition. They blinked first. Their first offer arrived by email, formatted in a PDF with the law firm's letterhead. Sarah forwarded it with a single line: "They're testing you." The number was barely more than the original severance, essentially what they'd already tried to pay me to disappear, minus 4 months of legal fees and stress. The message was clear: go away cheaply or we'll make this expensive for everyone. I declined within an hour. The second offer took 3 weeks. Higher, meaningfully higher, but wrapped in conditions. Non-disclosure agreement, non-disparagement clause, language explicitly stating the company admitted no wrongdoing, that this was purely a business decision to avoid litigation costs. Sarah walked me through it on a call. This is real money, Sophie. Enough to cover the gap, restart your savings, give you breathing room. But you'd be signing away your ability to ever talk about what happened, and they get to pretend they did nothing wrong. I sat with that for days. The money would end fights with my husband, would let me tell my family it was over, would mean I could stop waking up at 3 a.m. reviewing depositions and document requests. But it would also mean the next person, the next 43-year-old with 20 years of loyalty, would walk into the same situation, with no warning, no precedent, no consequence for the people who decided experience was disposable. I want to counter, I told Sarah. We negotiated through attorneys, back and forth, language parsed and revised. I wasn't trying to maximize money, I was trying to find terms I could live with. Minimal restrictions, no admission of fault required from me either, the ability to speak generally about employment practices without naming names. My husband stopped asking about it. The silence in our house became its own presence, filling rooms we used to share easily. At family dinners, my mother would look at me with something between pity and frustration, as if I was stubbornly refusing a simple solution. Maybe I was. The exhaustion was real, not physical, but spiritual, the weight of standing alone while everyone around you sits down. 6 weeks later, the final offer arrived. Substantial, clean, minimal restrictions beyond standard confidentiality. Sarah sent it with a question mark in the subject line. I printed it out and sat at the kitchen table, alone, reading the same paragraphs over and over. No one was coming to tell me what to do. This decision was mine to carry. I signed the settlement on a Wednesday. The money arrived 2 weeks later, transferred cleanly into an account that suddenly looked more secure than it had in months. The case closed with the quiet efficiency of paperwork stamped and filed. No ceremony, no acknowledgement, just done. My family saw the number and exhaled. My husband smiled for a few weeks. My mother said, "See, it all worked out." My brother called it a win, as if winning had ever been the point. But they didn't see what happened inside Meridian Systems. I heard about it in pieces through former coworkers who reached out privately. HR conducted a full policy audit 3 months after the settlement. The VP who'd overseen the restructuring was quietly reassigned to a lateral position in a different division. The management team responsible for termination decisions was required to complete new training on age discrimination and documentation requirements. Nothing public, no press release, no ecology, just internal corrections made in the dark, visible only to people who knew where to look. A former colleague told me termination procedures were completely overhauled. Mandatory documentation periods, multiple approval layers, standardized severance calculations that actually matched the employee handbook. "It's like they're scared now," she said. "Everything's by the book." I felt nothing dramatic hearing this. No vindication, no triumph, just a strange, hollow recognition. The system changed because I refused to disappear, and no one would ever know except the people it protected going forward. My family never asked about any of that. They saw money and closure and interpreted it as validation of their advice to let it go. They missed entirely that letting it go would have meant none of those policy changes happened. The next person would have faced the same erasure with no consequence, no correction, no cost. I started a new job 5 months after the settlement. Smaller company, better culture, people who valued institutional knowledge instead of fearing it. I wasn't the oldest person in the room being phased out. I was the experienced hire they'd specifically sought. I moved forward, built new routines, stopped checking legal documents at 2 a.m., but I carried the knowledge with me. What happened, what it cost, what it changed, with no one to share it with who'd actually understand. The loneliest part wasn't the fight, it was the quiet after, knowing what it meant alone. Months passed. The relationship with my family stabilized into something functional, but fundamentally altered, like a bone that healed slightly crooked. At Thanksgiving, my sister made a comment while passing the mashed potatoes. "Now that you're down with all that drama, maybe things can get back to normal." She said it lightly, casually, as if the past year had been an inconvenient detour I'd chosen for entertainment. My father nodded. "At least you can focus on real life now." Real life, as if fighting to matter was somehow separate from living. No one asked what the lawsuit accomplished. No one wanted to know about the policy changes or the people it might protect. They saw only disruption, embarrassment, unnecessary conflict that had finally, mercifully ended. I didn't regret the decision, but I grieved the validation I'd never receive from the people who were supposed to know me best. The loneliness wasn't about being alone, it was about being fundamentally misunderstood by your own family. They looked at me and saw stubbornness, vindictiveness, an inability to let things go. I looked at them and saw people who'd choose peace over justice every single time, who'd rather smooth things over than hold ground, who measured success by absence of conflict rather than presence of principle. There was no anger in this recognition, just a quiet acceptance of incompatibility. We operated from different moral frameworks, valued different things, defined integrity in ways that would never align. My husband and I existed in careful detente. We functioned as partners in logistics, mortgage payments, dinner plans, household tasks, but the deeper connection had fractured in ways neither of us knew how to repair. She'd needed me to be practical, I'd needed her to understand why I couldn't be. I found peace in smaller circles, a friend from college who'd been through something similar and simply said, "I get it." The online community of people who'd fought battles no one else could see. The occasional message from a former coworker thanking me for doing what they hadn't been able to. And in the quiet self-respect that comes from acting according to your own values when everyone else around you calls it wrong. That, at least, was mine to keep. 2 years out, I can see it more clearly. I'm established in my new role now, financially stable, building something again, but differently this time, with boundaries, with awareness, with the understanding that institutions don't love you back. I'm no longer defined by what was taken, I'm defined by what I refused to accept. My family still thinks I was crazy. They've never said it directly, but it's there in the careful way they navigate conversations, the topics they avoid, the relief in their voices now that the situation is behind us. What they called crazy was actually the sanest thing I could have done, refusing to internalize corporate cruelty as personal failure, refusing to let institutional betrayal go unchallenged, refusing to prioritize their comfort over my own dignity. There's a freedom in that, not freedom from consequences because there were plenty, but freedom from needing their approval, freedom from requiring external validation to know I'd done the right thing. The lawsuit wasn't revenge, it was refusal to disappear. The settlement wasn't victory, it was acknowledgement that I mattered enough to fight for, that erasing someone has a cost, that silence protects systems at the expense of people. I don't talk about it much anymore. The people who understand, understand. The people who don't, won't. My family continues to operate in their framework: stability over justice, peace over principle, moving on over holding ground. I've accepted we see the world differently. Sometimes the people who love you will call you crazy for refusing to shrink, for standing when they're all sitting, for choosing yourself when everyone else chose their own comfort. And sometimes you have to let them be wrong. I sleep well now, not because everything worked out, but because I can live with the person I was when it mattered. That's not crazy. That's the only sanity that ever belonged to me.